Hey, Jacques here. Okay, so in this video, we're wrapping everything up. We are putting together our design in prototype. We are adding the last few things in dashboard and in living room. This video is part of a video series where we are creating a home automation app using Figma and using auto layout. If you haven't seen the previous videos, make sure to check it out. The link is somewhere at the top. Essentially, with this entire video series, I've shown you how to create everything. But the last video and the last thing we're going to do is finishing off the dashboard and the living room frame. And we might actually go and add a few extra frames. I want to show you the power of Figma. I want to show you how powerful it is if you want to add extra frames to your design, and also using prototype to knit everything together. Why are we doing this? Well, if you're a good designer in Figma, you always need to showcase your work. You need to showcase your work to your manager. You need to showcase your work to your clients or customers or developers or project sponsors. You name it, you need to showcase what you've done. And we are doing this so that we can showcase everything. So with that all said, hit the like and subscribe button and let's jump right into it. Okay, so in the previous video, we looked at creating the dashboard. So essentially a few videos ago, we created the widget area. We also created the icon buttons and we created our dashboard tiles. In the actual dashboard tiles, we added the on switch and we added the off switch. And also on top of that, we also added the garage door and the driveway lights. So everything is slowly but surely coming together. And as you go through this video series, you'll see that our whole design will kind of knit together into the end result. So with this video, we are essentially going to create this part. I'm going to show you how to add all this good stuff. So let's jump into it. The first thing I want to do is actually add the background image into our dashboard area. And to do that, we are actually going to click on our dashboard. I'm just going to kind of move it to the center here. And we are going to add the actual background image. All right, so to add the background image on the right-hand side, we are going to click on the fill. We're going to click on the white part and we're going to say image and we're going to go and select our background image. Now, to be honest, I've lost that image. So I got a new image that we can use. So I'm just going to go and select that image. Now, when you select an image in the beginning, you're going to notice that it's super zoomed in. Obviously, that's not what we want. On the actual image settings, on the actual image properties, you'll see that we have a few options here. Now, you can select fit, which might work and it might not work. And if you choose fit, you'll see that it essentially just drops it into the section where we want the background image, but it's not really what we want. So we're going to change that back to fill. But then I'm going to change it to crop, and crop allows you to actually modify the background image. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And this is one thing I don't really like about Figma, or something that they really need to improve, is the actual crop area, because sometimes if you play around with things, it screws up the actual image. Okay, so we're going to resize our image, and to resize our image, you're going to hit any corner, you're going to select any corner, and you're going to hold in shift, and you're actually going to go and make the image smaller. So I'm just going to resize it to about that size, and you can continuously hold in shift because that can actually help you move the image about in a more kind of orderly fashion for that matter. So I'm going to hold in shift and we're going to move this image to where I want, and I'm just going to quickly do this so that we want the image where we want it, right? So I'm going to leave it to about here, and you're going to see that I actually have that little kind of black gap at the bottom because the image might be too small or the aspect ratio is off. But don't worry, we still need to add the actual menu at the bottom, so having it at that spot is probably a good idea. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to start putting together the menu at the bottom. That's one of the things that we need to do. So to do that, I'm actually going to select my layers, and you're going to see on the left hand side I have container, I have the outer widget area, and I have the add device. So we are going to essentially work in the dashboard area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the icons that we need. So we need home, stats, rooms, and settings. Now in the previous video, we actually worked on the icons, and you can see that we have all the icons here. So the first one I want is the actual little home icon. So I'm going to select my home. I'm going to right click and I'm going to create component. And we're going to do this for all of them. We're gonna create a component for all of them. This just makes life so much easier when you're a designer and when you work on multiple designs. You constantly wanna make sure that you work and use the actual assets and components of Figma for that matter. Okay, so now we created all of them and we're gonna drop it into this area. So I'm gonna click on dashboard, I'm gonna go to my assets and we're gonna search for the assets that we just created. So I'm going to take the little home icon and we're gonna just drop it in, and we can probably do that for all of them. So I'm just gonna drag and drop all of them. I just wanna see, we still need, looks like we need settings. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4. Just gonna double check 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, perfect. So now we have all the icons, but you're gonna notice that it's not in the actual dashboard area. So now we need to move things around to actually get it into the dashboard area. So I'm going to select all these guys and we're going to move it into our dashboard. And it's probably gonna put it, yeah, it's gonna put it exactly where we don't want it. So we need to go and play around with it a little bit. The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to group this. So you're gonna see I've got all my vectors here. So I'm gonna group it and we're just gonna call it main menu container. Okay, perfect. And as always, we are actually going to activate auto layout. And I'm gonna click the little plus button and we're gonna change the vertical layout to horizontal layout. So it puts it all like that. And the next thing we need to do is we just need to change this to auto. It's not really gonna do anything at this stage because we don't really have settings activated for it to do anything. But what I want to do now is I want to take this main menu container and we need to move it to the bottom. So I'm literally just gonna click on this auto layout group frame thing and we're gonna move it to the bottom. Okay, so now that we've moved it to the bottom, you're going to see that it is at the bottom, but it's not really, it looks pretty bad at this stage. So we need to go and figure out what's going on. And I think the main reason for this is because main menu container does not have a full background. So I'm going to go ahead and actually add a full background. And when I do that, I'm also going to change the width to full the container, and we are going to leave the vertical resizing to hug for now, but I'm going to add a bit of padding at the top and bottom and padding to the left and right. Now you're going to see that it's starting to kind of come together as what we want. The next thing is we need to take these icons that we have and we're just going to go and change the color. Now, one thing, and this is sometimes you will see this, is you'll see these little kind of rectangle border little thingies on a vector. And that for some reason happens. I think it's a bug in Figma, my opinion, but it essentially tells us that the absolute positioning has been active on this little item, which on the top right-hand side, you'll see that absolute positioning is active. So I'm just gonna deactivate that. And then you'll see that the actual icon moves to the right-hand side of our artboard. That's what we want. Okay, so now with that done, the next thing is we need to actually change the physical colors of each one. So I'm gonna open up my layer and I'm gonna select all of my icons. And you have to do it this way because if you don't, if you actually go and just select all the vectors and change the color, it's gonna change the background and that's not what we want. We want the actual icon to change the color. So on the right-hand side, we're gonna change that to dark. Now, it's kind of getting there. It's, again, not really what we want, but it's getting closer for sure. The next thing I want to play around with is just the actual naming convention. As always, as a good designer, you want to make sure that you always rename your items. So we're just going to call this one stats. This one is rooms. And the last one is settings. All right. Okay, perfect. I'm gonna minimize all of them for now. And now that they're minimized, we can actually start going and putting in the little text that we want. So I am going to hit my little text tool and we're just gonna click on the main container menu thing, make sure we have the text tool activated. And I'm just gonna type in home and you'll see again, it's not gonna drop it where you want. So I'm going to move this next to home and it's gonna shift everything. That's fine, but I'm gonna select my text that I just dropped home and the actual icon home. I'm gonna group that together, activate auto layout. We're gonna move the direction and we're gonna change the actual gap spacing. We're just gonna change that to 0 for now because I can't actually see my text, so I don't know what's going on. I'm gonna go back to my layers and we're gonna change our text and we're gonna change it to dark, but a few things kind of shifted around and changed. So when I go back to the frame that I just created, frame 1, we're just gonna say home icon. and we are going to change the actual width of it. We're going to change it to hug. So now that it is hug, it kind of looks like what we want. So the next thing is I'm just going to center the actual content of this frame, and yeah, there we go. There we go. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that for the rest of them. And to speed up things, I'm literally just going to take my home text. I'm going to copy it, and we're going to drop it in at every single one of them. All right, so now that's done, we're actually going to group it together. I'm going to head and group all of them together. And we're just going to quickly do a rename here. Settings, rooms, and the last one, stats. Okay, perfect. Okay, so now that we've renamed them, we actually need to go and apply auto layout. So I'm going to hit auto layout on all of them individually. You can't do it together because if you highlight all of them and put auto layout, it's not going to do what we want. And then the last thing is I'm just going to change the actual orientation of them. And then we need to change the vertical gap. We need to center them, exactly what we did with the first one. And we're going to make that 0. Perfect. So there we have kind of what we want. Again, playing around with it. So now that we have the base, we need to go and modify our text. So we need to add stats, rooms, and settings. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to change this to stats, rooms. Yeah, rooms is good. And settings. Perfect. All right, so now that we've done that, the last thing we need to do to kind of make this look good is we need to resize the icons a little bit. The trick here is that home, stats, rooms, and settings, the height of the actual icon needs to be consistent for it to look good. You don't need to necessarily worry about the width, but the height is crucial. So we're going to maybe use home as the actual height. And we can see that when we click on the actual icon that our height is 18.23 and width is 16.68. Now, before we start changing any kind of height, I'm going to stick to the actual height of the home, which is 18.23, and we're going to change the rest to kind of accommodate that. So 18.23, we're going to go and select our little stat vector and make sure that we click on the actual asset itself. And before we start changing a height, we're just going to constrain the properties. We're going to change this to 18.23. And I'm just going to go and copy this guy. We're going to do the same for this. I'm going to select the asset, constrain the properties. And the last one, we're also going to do that. So select the actual asset, constrain properties. Okay, so now it looks a little bit more conformed. It kind of looks a little better there. But now we're going to need to add our color. So I can see that we have a little bit of I think it is an opacity that I have. Yeah, so we have on the actual layer itself, we have an opacity, which the opacity is set to 35%. So I am going to go ahead and do that for the rest of them as well. So I'm just going to minimize all of them so that we can select all of them at once. And we're going to change the pass-through rate to 35. Okay, looking good, looking good. Now we just need to kind of wrap this up. It looks like we need to move our actual menu items closer together, because when I look at this guy right here, you can see that it's not on the edge itself. It's more to the actual, it's kind of moved in a little bit. So we need to go and change that so it looks like that. And to do that, we're going to go and select our actual auto layout main menu container, and we are going to change or play around with the actual padding on the side. So I'm just going to go ahead and add 50 or 45 or 40, but something is off here. I can see that something is not right. And the reason for that is because stats, rooms, and settings, the actual width is set to fix, and we need to go and change that to hug. And I'm going to quickly go and change that for all of them. And this is the kind of thing that you're going to get when you design. You're always going to have stuff like that that does not kind of work what you want. So it's always making sure and always double checking all your properties and all your variables and all your settings to make sure that it is pixel perfect. Okay, so now we created our menu and it looks pretty good. One thing that I noticed though is that we don't have our actual radius effect. So we got to have a look at why that is doing it. Normally, when you create a frame, you can set the clip content, but with my actual design, I don't have the rounded edges yet. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So clicking on the actual dashboard, we're going to change this to 30 so that we have that actual look that we want for a mobile app, the kind of radius border on the top, right, bottom, left kind of feel. Okay, so one thing I'm going to add though is a little shadow to this main menu, just so that it looks a little bit more realistic, but it's gonna be a very, very subtle shadow. So we're gonna click on the actual main menu container, and we're going to click the little plus effect, and we're going to play around with the drop shadow. I'm going to change the y-axis to minus, let's say -4. And we're gonna up the blur a little bit. So we're gonna put it about 25. And now I'm gonna bring down the actual opacity or the transparency of this shadow. It's literally just to kind of give it a little bit of an effect, a little bit of a 3D effect that we want. All right, so there we go. Now we have a little 3D effect. I'm just gonna add a little bit of padding on the top and the bottom. I'm gonna maybe increase this to about 20. 20 looks good. And now we have a little bit more of a beautiful effect that we want for this actual menu. Okay, so now that we added our main menu or our navigation at the bottom of our app, we need to start playing around with our actual image so it looks a little bit more dynamic. It's very kind of 2D at this stage. And we need to play around with the shadows, and we need to play around with the colors a little bit more so that we can actually get it to how it looks like over here. But before we do that, I am just going to add the actual heading and subheading and our little notification bell on the right-hand side. So to do that, we are going to go back to our dashboard, and we're going to take our text tool, and we are just going to drop it in, and I'm going to call it home. And when we drop it in, obviously we need to let it look like that and not like how it currently looks like. It's pretty small and it's the wrong font. It's 12px and regular. So with that said, let's quickly click on the design that I've already created. We can see that it's 26 semi-bold. And when I click on the actual home, and this is what I did in the previous video, is we created these style properties, but we want to click heading 1, which is 26. And when we click it, you'll see that it kind of makes it the size that we really want. Just to double check the size, we can actually unlink it and have a look at it. It's 26 and semi-bold. Yeah, that's what we want. So I'm gonna go back and select the actual heading 1 properties. Okay, so with our home added in there, we're literally gonna take our little home property and we're gonna duplicate it. And essentially we're gonna add in a street address. And I'm just using a random street address and a random city. And let's say Abbeville, Alberta. Now that we've done that, we need to change it so it's a little smaller. Let's go have a quick look at what the actual size is. It's 16 and light. And let's see if we actually have a property for this. So I'm going to click on the actual 17th Ave, the little address I just created. We're going to detach it, and I'm going to see if we have something. It looks like it's kind of paragraph copy, which is 16. And I just want to double check. So I'm going to detach it, 16 light. Yeah, that's exactly what we want. So I'm going to select the paragraph copy. Now that we've added the paragraph copy, we need to move it around a little bit, and we need to add a bit of grouping and auto layout and all that good stuff. So I'm going to select home and 17th Ave. I'm going to hold in shift to do that, and I'm going to group it together. We're going to activate auto layout, and I want the alignment to be on the left side. And there we go. Now it's on the left-hand side. The next thing is to add the actual icon. So I'm going to navigate back to my icons. I'm going to select my little bell, and we are going to go and create component. All right, so now the component is created. We are actually going to drop it in right here. So I'm going to go to my layers on the left-hand side, and we're just going to change this frame 1 to address real quick. I'm going to go to assets, and I'm going to look for my little bell that I just created, and let's see where it's at. It might be somewhere here. And right here, here's the bell. So I'm just gonna drop it in. And again, when you drop things in, it's always not what you want, but we're just gonna go and rename that layer. I'm just gonna call it bell. And we're going to move it right outside of the address because we don't want it in our actual address group. Once that's done, we're also gonna group that one. We're gonna activate auto layout, and we now need to create that little circular effect. And to do that, we need to change our actual width and height to fixed. And I'm going to change it to 60 by 60 for now, just so I can see what I'm doing. And I'm also going to change the actual alignment to be center, and we're going to add a fill, and we're going to change that to white. And then we're going to change our radius to something ridiculous like 500. And we do that. Why? Like I said in the previous video, we do that so it can give you that little circle effect. With that done, we are just going to change this to notification container. and I am going to open that up, and we're just going to change the actual color of our bell again so that we can actually see it. So I'm going to change it to primary. Okay, so with that done, now we're just going to make it a little smaller. So I'm going to click on my actual notification container, and we're going to change this. Let's change it to 35 and see how that looks like. Oh, that's a little too small. So maybe 45 for now. And I think what we need to do is we need to change the actual bell so it's a little bit smaller as well. To do that, we're going to select the actual asset, that's the little bell. We're going to constrain the properties again, and we're going to play around with the actual height. And I'm literally using the down arrow and the up arrow to kind of play around. And I want it about there for now. And again, as with any design, you need to play around with it until it's perfect. What we're gonna do next is we need to actually change the layout and the spacing of this. To do that, we're going to select our address and a notification container, and we're gonna group that together, and we're just gonna call it address noti container. Oh, container, there we go. And we're gonna auto layout this bad boy. And then we're gonna change our alignment, or our layout for that matter, to horizontal layout. And I'm going to open it up, and I'm just gonna move the notification container down. And then the last thing we need to do is we need to change our actual layout to auto. And we also need to change our width to fill the container. And the last thing you need to do is you need to change the actual alignment to be center. Okay, so now it's kind of getting where we want, but you're gonna notice that it's right on the edge of our frame. Obviously, that's not what we want, so we need to space it in a little bit. There's a few ways to do it. I normally add a little bit of padding on the left and right, so I'm going to select address node T container, and we're actually just going to add a bit of padding or spacing on both sides. Okay, so now we are getting there. We are getting closer. There's a few things that I need to do. And the first thing I need to do is we need to add this space that we have here. And again, there's a few ways of doing it, but I normally like to do it by going to click on the actual address node container, and we can start adding the vertical padding. And we're just gonna add it to 50. You know what? Let's change it to 35. That's kind of where we want it to be. And okay, good. Now, when we originally added the background image, you would remember that we had that little gap here. As we added our actual main menu at the bottom, you'll notice that the gap kind of filled beautifully, so that's what we want. Now that we've done this, now we can start playing around with our actual image, so this all looks better. And before I do that, I'm just gonna make my actual icon a little bigger. So I'm going to select my bell asset, and I'm just gonna up the height of our bell a little bit, and also I'm going to up these guys to 50 by 50. We're also gonna add, you know what, I'm gonna add a little bit of a shadow to it just so that we can kind of see something here. So I'm gonna change that to, you know what, I'm gonna change that to 0, but I'm gonna make my blur kind of 8, and I'm just gonna up the actual shadow a little bit. There we go. Okay, so now it's got a little bit of a 3D effect. That's good. Now we're gonna play around with the background image so that we can actually see the text, right? So what I normally do is I select the actual dashboard where we have our background image, and we're going to add a fill, and we're gonna add a black fill. But now I'm gonna change that 20 to 100. And the reason I'm doing that is because I'm going to add a gradient to it, and I'm just going to up the gradient to about there. And we need to swap this around. So to swap it, there's two ways of doing this. You can either move these two about, or the other way is you can literally just click on this, make it 100, click on the left one, and bring that down. So I'm going to make the top one 0, and the bottom one, we're gonna bring that down a little bit as well. So I'm gonna bring it to about there. And now we can see the actual text. It's kind of popping a little bit more. So now we're starting to get that effect that we have over here. And now the last thing you can do is you can actually go to the image, and we can just play around with the exposure a little bit and play around with the contrast just so it pops a little bit more. And this is all kind of, you know, playing around with it until you can kind of get a perfect look and feel for it. Last thing is I just want to change the actual vertical padding on this, maybe change it to 25 so we can bring it down a little bit. And there we go. We can see that we have a beautiful looking heading and address. I'm just gonna fine tune it a slight bit, and I'm gonna add a bit of a vertical gap between the two items. So we're just gonna move it out a tiny bit. And there we go. There we have our actual background image. We've played around with the background image. We played around with the color so it looks a little bit more realistic. Okay, so now with that all done, the last thing I want to do before we start moving on to the next thing is I just want to fine tune it a tiny bit, because when you look at the original design, you'll see that the dashboard is higher up than the one we have. And the primary reason for that most likely is the space that we have between add device icons and my device. So I'm going to click on, let's see, I'm going to click on the actual icons and we can play around with padding bottom just to kind of get that little space there so it's a little closer to where we want it to be. And I am going to keep it, let's see how 25 looks. So 25 is going to be too much. So let's change it to 15. And there we go. All right, so now with our dashboard completed, we need to start working on our living room. And I'm going to show you how easy it is to now start slapping everything together and get this living room frame done. So the first thing I'm going to do before I do anything else is I'm going to take this home and address, and I'm literally going to make a component of that. The reason I'm doing that is because I want to use that component for this area where we have living room and 4 devices on our second frame. All right, so now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select living room, and we're actually going to change the full, and we're going to change it to a background image. Okay, so you'll see that I used a different image. I'm always playing around with different kind of images. So again, I get all my images from a free website called Pexels. You probably know about this website. You know, for demonstration purposes, it's a good website to use, but when you actually go into production, when you actually create an app for proper use by the public, you always want to stay away from kind of free images and go more for either your own images or images that you pay for. Why? Well, the primary reason is originality, right? You want to be original with your images. The downside of using free images is that that image that you select or that material that you select are used throughout the whole web like 1,000 times. So I always recommend when you create a design that you're quickly going to put together to showcase to developers or your project sponsors or your managers, whatever the case might be, then using a free image is perfect, but for actual production, you want to use a paid image or your own material for that matter. Okay, so now we added an image. One thing I quickly want to do is I want to add the radius to the living room frame. So I think we used 30. So I'm just going to do that. I'm going to add 30 to it. Beautiful. Okay, so now that we've done that, I am actually going to add my actual effect to the image as well, just so that we can darken it a little bit so it looks a little more authentic. So I'm going to add a little full to it, and we're just going to change this to 100 for now, and I'm going to move it down until I like where I see it. I'm just going to put it about there for now, and now I'm going to play around with the contrast so we can get it to pop a little bit more and bring down the exposure. You know what, I'm going to leave the exposure, bring up the saturation a slight bit, and bring up the temperature maybe a little bit, just to kind of make it pop a little bit. Bring down the contrast. You got to play around with it. It's all about playing around with an image and a design. You know what, I like that. That is perfect. Okay, so now we have our actual image. Now we're going to add this living room area, and we're going to add this bottom tiles. To do that, we are first going to take our living room. You're going to see it's a normal frame. I'm just going to add auto layout to it. You want to make sure that your auto layout on a frame itself is always horizontal resizing is fixed and vertical resizing is fixed, because if you change that, it's going to start moving around your frame, and then you're going to go outside of the specs of what you're originally designing this for. For this specific design, we're designing it for the iPhone 15. So with that said, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my living room and go to my assets, and this home that we just created, I'm literally just going to drop it in here, and we're going to change this, and I'm going to change that right there to living room. Perfect. And then let's change it to 5 devices for that matter. 5 devices. Okay, so I think with the original design, I'm just going to double check. Okay, perfect. We use 16px light. That's exactly what we want. All right, so now with that done, we are actually going to click on our living room, and we're going to change the actual layout to be at the bottom. For now, we're going to change that back again, but for now I'm going to put it right here at the bottom, and I'm going to take my living room, and we're actually going to group and also create an auto layout for it. But then I want the actual width to full container, and I want this to be on the left-hand side. Okay, getting closer. The last thing I want to do is I just want to add a bit of padding here. And I'm actually going to add the padding to the frame itself, and I'm changing these to 25 and 25. Now that that's done, we are going to drop in the tiles that we already created, and see, this is how everything is now coming together, is we are using all of the assets that we've originally created, and we're literally just gonna drop it in. Okay, so to do that, I'm gonna take this guy, I'm gonna right click, I'm gonna create component, take this guy, right click, create component. And with that done, now I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to drop that into my actual frame. So I'm gonna take this guy, we're just gonna drop it in, take this guy, and we're just gonna drop it in, and we will see. Yeah, that's good for now. We can actually play with that. Now, the next thing is we need to go back to our layers. We need to take what we have here and, as always, group it together. Before we do that, I'm just gonna rename this to heading. And this one I'm going to change to, let's say, tiles for now. And we're gonna hit auto layout, and I'm going to change it to horizontal layout. And now that that's done, we're actually gonna take our tiles and we're gonna duplicate that. We're gonna add a few of them. Okay, so you're going to see that everything is center right now, and obviously that's not what we want. To change that up a bit, we're actually going to select our main frame, our living room frame, and we're gonna change the actual layout to left, and you're gonna see that we have that effect right there. Now, what we want to do next is we actually want to select our living room, and we wanna say clip content so that we can have that effect. And with that effect, you're gonna see that it actually hides the rest of the tiles, which is fine. That's kind of what we want. The next thing is we're just gonna move these tiles to the actual bottom. I'm just gonna drag it down there, and there we go. Okay, so with that done, you're going to see that living room is quite hard to read. That means that we need to go back to our image and kind of fine tune a little bit. So to do that, I'm going to select living room, and we're gonna change this original fill we added to 100%. And I'm doing that because I wanna add a gradient to it. And I'm just gonna make both gradients 100 just so that we can start from the top to the bottom. And I'm going to select the top one, and we're gonna bring down the actual gradient a little bit to a point where we like it. I kind of like it right there. It's easy to read. Perfect. Okay, so there we go. We have a little bit of a gradient. Now that we have the gradient and the overlay, I'm just gonna fine tune our actual temperature because I want a little bit more gold in here, and maybe drop the exposure a tiny bit. Okay, there we go. It kind of looks much better. It looks a little bit more kind of modern, a little bit more modern design. Now with that done, we can now just go and quickly change our actual tiles. And let's change this to, let's call it left light. And let's call this one right light. Perfect. And then what we can do is we can select our icon, go to our assets, and we're just gonna take the bulb and we're gonna drop it in. And you're gonna see that, as always, it puts the icon or anything that you get from the assets exactly not where you want it. So we need to take this icon and we need to put it in there. And to do that, the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna select my actual asset container. I'm gonna right click it, and I am going to detach the instance. The reason we do that is because you can't physically modify it. You can't add or remove any type of assets, media, or icons if you don't do that. So I'm going to select my actual bulb again. Quick thing, I'm just gonna rename it real quick, and we're gonna cut that guy, and we're going to drop it in right there. I'm gonna take my little garage icon, and we are going to delete it. Okay, so now I'm just gonna make sure we deleted the whole thing. There we go. And now I'm going to select my bulb. And again, you wanna make sure you select the actual vector and not the actual asset. And we're gonna change that to dark. There we go. Small little thing that I wanna do is I wanna take this living room. I'm just gonna add a padding at the bottom so we can move it up a little bit, just so it looks a little better. And I just want to space out the actual tile a little bit. So I'm gonna select my actual tiles auto layout. And we're just gonna move it out a little bit just so that we can have that realistic effect of, you know, tiles kind of, you need to scroll to the right, and you want to make sure it kind of matches the actual spacing that you have, because if you do it too much, that doesn't look good, right? So we just want to move it to about, I would say 28 is good. It kind of shows the user that, hey, there's more to it, right? Now, one thing you can do is you can kind of take the spacing or the width and move it out a tiny bit. But if you're gonna do it on one tile, obviously you're going to need to do it on the other tiles as well. So I'm just gonna add that too. And now that we look at it, you're gonna see that, it shows the user, hey, I can actually swipe to the right of it. All right, so now that we have living room added, we can literally go and duplicate this artboard. So I'm gonna hold in Alt and Shift, and we're gonna duplicate it. And let's change it to garage. And this is how powerful Figma is. Now that we've done all this, it's literally just duplicating it. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to go look for a garage image, and we're actually going to add the garage to it. Okay, so I just got a random background image online, again, free image. And this is gonna be our garage background image. I am just going to change the full to crop, and let's see, well, I can't really modify it, but I can move it out a little bit. I like the look of the actual vehicle itself though, that looks pretty cool. So with that done now, we can just literally go and change this to garage, and we can maybe change this to 3 devices or 2 devices. Let's make it 3 devices. And now I'm actually going to, because we already have garage door as a tile, I'm literally going to just reuse that. So to do that, I am literally just gonna take these insider tiles, and we're just going to delete it. Oh, hey, look, I already have garage door there. And let's change the switch to off, and we're gonna do that way. So let's replace the other garage door with a light, one that we have in our assets. So I'm gonna go back to my assets, and we're just gonna navigate around until I can actually see where my actual tiles are. And right here is a tile, so we're just gonna take that and we're gonna drop that in, and we're gonna change this to garage light. Perfect, and let's change this to actually be on. See how powerful it is? See how powerful Figma is when you use the assets that we've done throughout the whole video series. Now it makes life so much easier and quicker to just kind of put everything together. Okay, so we have a third tile in there. I'm gonna leave it for now. I'm just gonna go ahead and add another artboard, and let's go and add bedroom for that matter. Perfect, so now that we've added the bedroom, I'm actually gonna change the image real quick. And to change the image, we're just literally going to obviously click on the image, and I'm going to go and search for my image. All right, so now I've just dropped in my image. Because we have the settings of the previous frame, we obviously need to go change the settings again. So I'm gonna change crop to full, and there it looks a little better, but it's still not 100%. So I'm going to select my bedroom, and we're just gonna change full to crop. I'm gonna move the image slightly to the right so that the user can still see that, hey, it is an actual bedroom. And there we go, we have our bedroom, and we're just gonna change this to master suite. And we're gonna change this to maybe 2 devices, 4 devices, doesn't really matter. There we go. And we're just going to take this tile and we're gonna delete it, and take this tile and we're gonna delete it for now. And then I'm just gonna change this to lights left and duplicate it. Oh, that's not the duplication I'm looking for. We actually wanna duplicate this one, and we're gonna change this to light right. Okay, so with that done, we created a couple of artboards here that we can play around with. One is living room, one is garage, and one is bedroom. Okay, so now that we have a couple of frames or a couple of artboards or whatever you want to call it, we are now going to use the prototype tool and put everything together. Again, this is just a demonstration. It's not an actual app. It's not going to be usable, but we're just going to purely do this for demonstration purposes. Okay, so with that said, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to navigate to our dashboard, and we're going to click on prototype, and we're going to start now creating a prototype effect. So the first one is I'm just going to take this button right here, and we're going to link it up to living room, and we are going to say, yeah, let's say navigate to, let's add a bit of a smart animate, and let's see what we have here. So when we select smart animate, we can actually change the actual animation type. So I can maybe use ease in and out back, and maybe change the actual speed or the actual duration to about 500. Okay, perfect. So now we can test it, and to test that, we can literally hit the little play button, and when we hit the play button, it's actually going to open up our design. In most cases, it's not actually going to open up where we want it to be, as you can see. So we need to go to flow 2, and you'll see that, hey, this is in a beautiful little iPhone, which is That's pretty good. So when I click on this button, it's actually going to have an animation that it's actually going to go to that frame and it's going to show it to us. But that's kind of not really what I want. So let's go back to actual design. So let's click on this prototype and I'm going to click on it and let's change a few things up here and maybe change it to open overlay. Okay, so once open overlay is selected, we just want to change the actual animation because by default it will be instant. So we want to do maybe move in, and yeah, that looks good. Let's see, we can maybe change the direction. Let's change it from bottom to top. And with that settings changed, now we can go and quickly test it. I'm going to click on flow again. Let's see. That looks pretty cool. That looks pretty cool. Okay, perfect. One thing I want to add though is a back button. In the original design, I added a little back button so that I can go back to the main dashboard. So let's go ahead and add a back button real quick. So to do that, let's see, I think I already have icons. Yeah, I do. So I'm going to select my icon and as always, create a component, and we're going to go to our living room and we're going to go to assets. I'm going to look for that little icon I just created. I'm going to drop it in, but you're going to see it puts it right at the bottom. Now that I look at it, it doesn't look that bad. It actually looks pretty cool on that end as well, but I'm going to stick with the basics here. So I'm going to navigate away from prototype on the right hand side because if you have prototype activated, you can't really do much. So I'm going to go back to design and we're actually going to group this one, and I'm just going to call that back BTN. And we are going to select auto layout and we're going to select fixed width, fixed height, and change this to 50 by 50. And I'm going to change the border radius to 500 to create that beautiful circle. And I'm just going to add a white fill. And the last thing we need to do is we need to center our icon. And the very last thing we need to do is we need to change the color of our actual icon to back. Okay, so now that we have a back button, I can take this guy and I can literally create a component so we can reuse it in the other frames that we have. So with that all done, we just need to get this icon to be at the top. So I'm going to select my living room and we're going to change our actual layout to be auto. All right, so with that change, you will notice though that our living room text has kind of shifted up. So one of the key things we need to do is we need to adjust one of these frames, one of these auto layouts, and just looking at it and just clicking on it, I can see that we need to change our inner frame, frame one's auto layout. And so the quick thing I want to do though is I want to change the frame name to inner container. And with that done, we are just going to change the auto and we're just going to set it to that for now, 291, but we want to change that 291 to 25. And the last thing I want to do is we need to change the alignment to be at the bottom of the page. Okay, so that's already looking much better. It's already looking like what we want. But one small thing is I want to decrease the space, and we're just going to change the space to maybe 12. Actually, you know what? I'm going to make it 0. There we go. So with that done though, we would need to do that at every single frame. What I want to do is I want to connect garage and bedroom the same way we did with living room. To do that, we need to go back to our prototype and we need to go and connect the rest of them. So I'm just going to zoom in and have a look at what we did here. So we essentially said it's going to be a move in and it is an open overlay and it's ease in out back with 500 milliseconds. So let's go ahead and do that for the rest of them. I'm just going to go ahead and close this one and we're going to take the next button and we're just going to link it up to garage. And we're going to say navigate to, we're going to change navigate to open overlay. And we are going to change the instant to move in. And we're going to change it to ease in and out back. We're going to change this guy to 500. You know what? I'm actually going to keep the animation to slide it in from the right to left. This just kind of shows a different kind of animation for whomever you are sharing this design with. So I'm just going to go ahead and close this. And we're going to go ahead and link the bedroom as well. And again, we're going to change navigate to open overlay. And we are going to change the move in to move in from the right. And I can see that it adapted my settings of my previous animation. So that's good. And now with this all done, let's go ahead and test this. So I'm going to click on my dashboard. And we're just going to hit the little play button at the top. And as you hit the play button, you'll see that it will load in the background and it will open up a new tab for you. Okay, so with the animation loaded up here, we're just going to quickly test our overlay animations. we still need to add the back button, or we still need to configure the back button to go back to the main screen here. So as you can see, I have my flow 2 activated. And when I click on this button, you'll see that it kind of animates in from the bottom to the top as an overlay. It's exactly what we want. And if I test the other ones, this one kind of slides in from the right to left, which looks pretty cool. And the last one kind of slides from the left to right. And I love the animation on it. I love what we've done here. Now, the last thing we need to do before we can wrap everything up is we need to add the back buttons on the other frames, and we need to go and configure it as well. So I'm gonna go back to the design, and we're gonna click on this little back button, and I'm just gonna drag it so that it goes back. And what I wanna do here is I want to change the navigate to overlay, and let's change it to that kind of animation. Okay, cool. Now this is the great thing about Figma is you don't need to reload anything. You can just test it on the fly. Yeah, that looks pretty cool. That looks pretty great. But you know what? I'm going to let it slide to the left because it's a back button. So I'm just gonna click on this guy right here, click on the animation, and we're just gonna get that to go from right to left. So if I test this again, I'm just gonna open it up. All right, so that's okay, but I really want the animation to look like it's a back button that you click. So I'm just gonna change it from going right to left to go from left to right. Let's see how that looks like. Open it up and close it. Yeah, that looks pretty cool. Okay, so now we need to go and add our back button to the rest of them. So I'm gonna go out of prototype mode here, and we're just gonna quickly add in our back arrow. So I'm gonna navigate over to assets, and let's just see what we have for assets. And you know what? I want that actual back button that we already created. So I just wanna make sure, do we have it? Yep, it's right here. So I'm gonna take this guy, I'm gonna drag it in, and I'm gonna do the same for bedroom. I'm gonna take back button, I'm gonna drag it into the artboard or to the frame. Now I'm gonna go back, and we're just gonna change the actual frame to auto. And I'm just going to select my heading, which is garage and tiles. And we're just gonna group that together and activate auto layout. And with that done, we need to change the vertical gap so that we can control it. I'm gonna change it to 0, and the alignment is gonna be bottom left. And there we go, it looks exactly like what we have on the living room. So I'm gonna do the same for the bedroom as well. I'm gonna select my heading, master suite, and the tile itself. We're gonna group that together, activate auto layout, and we are gonna change our vertical gap to 0. You would see that it automatically adapted to what we did with the previous frame, which is pretty good. That's kind of what we want. And so just for the bedroom, we need to change the actual frame to go to auto so that it moves right to the top. All right, so the last step we need to do is we just need to go back to prototype, and we need to link up our back buttons to go to our main frame. So I just did that right there. Oh, and I'm just gonna navigate here, and we're going to do exactly the same animation as what we did with the rest. So you'll see that the animations are adapted to what you did previously. So I'm just gonna do the last back button, and we're gonna link it up to the dashboard, and it just adapts exactly what we want. And now we can go ahead and test everything. So obviously the living room, we know that works. Let's see the garage. Yeah, that's pretty cool. And the master suite, awesome. So you'll see that in this entire video series, we essentially created an entire mobile app from scratch in Figma using auto layout, which is pretty cool. And you know, we did this so that you can take this and showcase it to designers, you can showcase it to managers, you can showcase it to project sponsors, and so forth, right? So it really, really gives you the autonomy, and it gives you the power to easily show a design to whomever you want it to. And the powerful thing with prototype is it just gives the user a more clear vision of what your vision is. All right, so with that said, thank you so much for watching the entire series. I appreciate it. If you stumbled across this video and you want to see the rest of it, make sure to check out the playlist. It is quite a few videos, and I split it up into different sections because it is a lot. It's a lot to kind of digest, and it's a lot to view. So make sure to check that out. Up next, we are going to look at how to create a website in Figma from scratch and then develop it using Bootstrap. And then furthermore, I'm also going to show you how to push that into production in Microsoft Azure, as well as using Docker and Kubernetes and all that kind of good stuff. It's going to be focused on designing and developing a super lean website. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. I do post videos on a daily or weekly or monthly basis. All right, so with that said, thanks so much for watching and see you soon.